Welcome, everyone. Welcome back from lunch, and good afternoon. My name is Tobie Baker-Wright. I work with JFF. Today, there are so many aisles that seem to divide us. We have red and blue, urban and rural, white collar, blue collar, education, workforce, and then we can layer in race, religion, ethnicity, diet, paleo, gluten-free, keto, all of these things, all of these divides can seem to polarize. And yet, our challenge today is to work together to ensure that all young people, regardless of race, ethnicity, or address, achieve great things. Today, we're going to explore frameworks and practices that can help you connect and build across these many aisles. This is a wicked and challenging problem, and I look forward to having an interactive conversation, not only with Jeremiah and Mark, but also hopefully including many of you. And so we'll be using Slido to engage you in questions and also sharing some of your ideas and practices from the field. So to start, we have our first question for you. And for those of you, you can go to ACC 12AB in your app, and you'll find your first question. What are the different challenges that you experience in working across the aisle? So I'm here from Jobs for the Future, and my organization works nationally to ensure that young people and workers have the skills and credentials that they need to succeed in our economy. We work across 42 different states and tribal nations. We work from K-12 through post-secondary and on to workforce and labor. Part of what we do is we look for innovative ideas, innovative evidence-based ideas, and elevate those, build system capacity and field capacity with our partners across the nation, and work on advocating and addressing policy, both the little p and the big P. In our conversation today, we're going to be looking at strategies based in both evidence and experience. And here we have Mark Martin from Build Up, as well as further down the 65, we have Jeremiah Newell from the Mobile Area Education Foundation.
Plus.
Did I get it?
It's Mobile, but
Mobile. All right, Mobile, sorry. But what I would like for you both to do is introduce not just your organization, but what drives you to work across the aisle.
Yeah, so Build Up is kind of just this composite of everything from my experience, both professionally and personally, really my entire life. But the last 15 years I've been in public education, and it's a lonely, siloed sector often, and we often don't collaborate, not just teacher to teacher, but especially going across town to collaborate across schools or across sectors. And so on top of that, we have all these polarizing issues, hot button issues, some of which you mentioned, and often we end up headbutting. And so for me, if we're actually going to get some of the outcomes that we desire for kids, families, and communities, the only way to go about that is to collaborate. And it seems it's not such a novel approach, but I think in education especially, it's pretty rare that we're taking those steps to get there. And so I'm pursuing Build Up right now, Build Urban Prosperity in Birmingham, Alabama. And from the very beginning, I knew this was by far the most challenging task I've ever taken on, but also the one that I couldn't do alone. There's no way I can do it. There's no way Build Up as an organization could do it alone, and it was going to require us to operate across these aisles and across sectors and bring in private sector partners, public sector partners, faith-based partners, you name it. And so we're doing it out of necessity, but also because I think that's the only way we can achieve our goals.
So for me, very similarly, I came to this work at about 17 years old in high school. I was one of those young people who was engaged in my local community. I was born and raised in Mobile, Alabama, and really saw as a young person how how rare it was that students were and student issues and student needs were truly at the center of what we did. Instead, it seemed to be always about adult politics and adult needs and adult concerns, and so over the years, as I became a teacher and a school leader, and now I'm the lead the organization that has launched charter schools and works in a community focus for over 27 years as an entity. I found that the only way to create sustained progress, and I emphasize sustained progress, is by having diverse, different ideologies, resources, perspectives come to the table at the same time to try to tackle really, really challenging issues. And in a place like Mobile, where there's limited resources, we have to do it together or it doesn't get done. The philanthropic community is not flying in. You know Alabama politics. You've been following it, I'm sure, out there. So certainly the political spectrum is not always pro-reform. And so all of those things require us to figure out new and ingenious ways to make dollars and ideas go further. And I think that really is a kind of case study for lots of other communities like us across the country.
You spoke about shared vision. So what I'd like, could you share more about how you elevate your vision to bring multiple perspectives and partners across the aisle to your table?
Yeah, I think shared vision is the first step to collaboration across the aisle. If we don't have a foundation of agreement about where we're trying to go roughly for what change we're trying to create, then when we fight over how to get there, we're talking multiple languages to one another. And so for us, we found shared language to be critically important. And there are a couple of real big pieces for me. One is the importance of being able to speak a language that is both the whole and then elevating the marginalized. So speak to a group, speak to everyone in the sense that we want to improve, we want to grow, we want change to take place, but then don't be afraid to talk about equity in the same breath. So what group of people are not growing, and how, if we work together, can we close the gaps in opportunity? The second thing for me that I've found is the importance of naming the value. So the business community wants to work together for a different reason oftentimes than the faith-based community, for example. So speaking the values of both groups allows folks to kind of connect around shared values. And then the last piece is urgency. If we don't communicate that this work has to happen now, then everyone's doing a million other things. Mm-hmm. And so that just causes us to kind of fall down in the level of collaboration. So, but I'll make it kind of concrete. Let me show an example. Could we hit play on this little image here? Did I mess it up? Play right there. So this is literally what we've done here in Mobile to try to communicate. So that line is the line from K-12 to professional. That's what we want. We want all kids to cross that graduation line ready. But in Mobile, the reality is 8,300 students start in the 9th grade across our 60,000 school district. Only 6,300 are still there in the 12th grade. So that's a difference of 76%. But more importantly, that's 2,000 children every single year who are not graduating. And of those kids who graduate, only half are truly ready. Look at the courses they've taken. Look at their ACT scores, 38%. And of the new jobs that we're getting here, Airbus, all these cool things, 85% training. So we have a supply and demand problem. We're needing 85% of the jobs to be prepared, but 38% are ready. And so we also have to think about the graduation line, though, as the poverty line. And this is an important conversation in our community, to the marginalized. 19,400 income of dropouts, 21,000 the poverty line in our community. And think about all the costs below that. Babies having babies, incarceration, children, health care. For us, we actually did some calculations on what that looks like, and it's about $7 billion for every group of those 2,000 children over the course of our community's time. But for every dollar we spend to get students to the graduation line ready, we got $1.30 in return in that economic study. So for us, we know that we have to do differently. for all children and for everyone. And so our vision is this arch, and it is not the McDonald's arch. It is like the St. Louis arch. Like, imagine that. The knowledge and skills that all kids need. And that is stagnant. Every kid meets those standards, but they get there differently. They get through charter schools. They get through district schools and the career academies and IB programs that meet their needs, and we all collaborate. This vision and the articulation of this, both for the marginalized and also for as a whole, helps us to create a shared value from one another. So whether you're thinking return on investment or you're thinking community vitality, you see a place here. And this has been very effective. So that's the kind of thing we've found, is constructing a vision that brings everyone along.
Having a vision that's broad enough where different partners can still find value in the solution that you're creating.
Exactly.
Working together as a community to create.
And that we are creating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, everyone can see their place in how to kind of support these various approaches to learning.
And I liked how you switched that pronoun. So we went from what I'm doing or my organization is doing to what are our organizations doing? What are we doing as a community to address this issue?
Yeah.
Today we're going to talk almost about a strategic triangle based on not only experience, but also grounded in evidence. We're going to be looking at strategic partnerships. We're going to be looking at leadership and capacity. And we're also going to be looking at innovative solutions and how innovation can invite multiple people across the aisle to the table. So we're going to start with innovative solutions. At JFF, we work across 42 states and with several tribal nations to elevate innovation that is occurring in communities. So often there are these bright spots and ideas where communities step forward and work to solve their own problems. As we think about innovation, what role does innovation play in terms of bringing people in from across the aisle?
I think it's pretty critical, but first I want to kind of step back and talk about innovation in education. And it's different at a place like South by Southwest, where there are some really, really innovative things happening, but I think those are like way down the road. And then where most educators are operating is kind of way on this end of the spectrum. And then so what we call innovation is often just autonomy, right? Giving school leaders or people closer to the kids choice over what they can do. But at the end of the day, what we're doing with Build Up is not that innovative, in my opinion. We are taking best practices that are out there to tackle a hugely significant challenge. I've heard it recently said that collaboration is the new innovation. And if we really could do that in education, it would feel very innovative to me. Can you jump to the next? Zooming in here again, I mentioned all of us, or a lot of us, are operating in this far left silo, if you will. The absence of a quality K-12 and post-secondary education is one of the big pieces that Jeremiah was talking about. It's one of the pieces that's lacking. But for me, it's also housing, and we know there are a lot of healthcare issues also related to environmental issues coming from homes, a lot of breathing issues, you name it. The job skills that Jeremiah said are so dramatically missing in the South especially, but in every community, especially low-income communities. And then ultimately having social capital. Who are the people that can open doors for you? That's how most of us have gotten our first few jobs. And then if we're going to really turn the dial on economic development and create jobs, often it takes money to get there. So for us, the innovation was just putting these proof points all together. So Habitat for Humanity has done a great job for decades of getting low-income people into homes, but they don't necessarily create job skills or give the skills to maintain those homes. So if you can't afford to pay a plumber $110, which none of us want to do, often a leaky pipe turns into a rotten floorboard. So what we're doing with Build Up is complex but simple in some ways. We're going to take young people in 9th grade, so they come straight to us, and we are both the education piece and the workforce development piece. They spend about half their time in an academic setting, but everything is directly related to the work they're doing in paid apprenticeship. And that paid piece is key for equity. Not everybody can afford an unpaid internship. Most folks, in fact, can't, that we work with especially. And so our kids are learning geometry, but in a shop setting with 2x4s, framing out a wall. And then that afternoon, they'll go to a blighted abandoned home in the community. And the 20 of them will be rebuilding their community. We take kids from the community and we give them the skills and empower and equip them to lead the longer term change in the community. So over 6 years, they're getting a high school diploma, they're getting an associate's degree in a chosen field as well, not just the blue collar side of real estate and construction, but the white collar as well, and they'll have exposure to all these pieces. The third piece is they'll have a set path into the middle class, and that's pretty critical. So that's either launching a small business on their own, supported by us. That can be going to work with one of our partners in a salaried position, so family sustaining wages, or completing their education, going on and do a 4-year degree to pursue engineering or nursing or whatever it is that they want to pursue, because communities need all of that, right? So we're just tying all of that together, and here's the kicker. As they're 20, 21 years old, launching into adulthood, they take over the deeds to these blighted abandoned homes that we've now converted into like-new duplexes. And in one fell swoop, they become homeowner and landlord. And then these 20 young people in this dense area are now the leaders leading these long-term reforms and refueling this community. So we don't shy away from the big problem that we're tackling. We're tackling poverty and urban blight. But this innovation of collaborating and working across sectors in Birmingham is why I think we can actually solve that.
And as we look nationally, when we see that communities are really coming together to tackle these big problems, one of the things that emerges is that there must be work across sector and across silo to do this. That like your project, they're building on proof points and ideas that have existed in other places and adapting it to their own community. There's no drag and drop. There's always some sort of work that has to go on as these ideas are spread and scaled.
Absolutely.
Next, we're going to move and look at an additional tool to start bridging the gap, and that is really focusing on the leadership and capacity needed to do this work.
Can I talk about my school too?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Oh.
Jeremiah,
it's a good thing. So I'll start off by saying that, we're talking about innovation around bridging the gap because oftentimes it's harder to bridge the gap between politics or belief or ideology if you're fighting over the same resources to exploit an idea that's already been created, because you already know where the pitfalls are. People are more likely to collaborate if we're focused on a challenge that we don't have good answers to on either side of the aisle. So for us, we took that approach in Mobile when we launched the first charter school in Alabama. We had a very, very timid environment to enter the charter sector. There's a reason why the first one's just opening now. It's a challenging place. And we wanted to make sure that we learned from other states and try to establish a charter sector that supported overall schools and educational development and ecosystem, not necessarily just in competition. So we actually designed Excel Day and Evening Academy. It's a 9-12 high school. We designed it to innovate around a population and a set of work that we just weren't doing well, period, in education in Alabama. So our young people at Excel are from a couple of different groups. There's a set of students who come to Excel because they were Ferris Bueller day off, just straight bored in the classroom, experiencing the kind of traditional factory model experience of education that's been in place for forever, and it didn't connect with their needs, their way of thinking in the world. They were asked to kind of turn off the way they thought in other places and come to school. And we fundamentally believe that there should be alignment between how we experience life in the day-to-day basis and how schooling works. So that's a population of kids who are there. We also have young people who might have fallen behind or 2 or more years behind academically. This isn't an alternative school in the sense that students are sent there for placement or the district just kind of wants to get rid of students. But we happily accept young people who might have, have chronic illness, might have had, behavioral things happen in the past, even probation officers. We have about 20% of our students who have a probation officer, but they've made progress or they're making progress. And we think that there should be a safe, supportive environment with a strong school culture that enables that young person to go from the challenges they have now to full, productive young adults making progress in college and in careers. And then the third group of students that we have, there are students who have left school altogether. They have been pushed out, they have dropped out, they have given up, but they are re-engaging in their learning environment. And so our school takes these young people, and we use a couple of different approaches, building upon best practices to help them get to success. One is our school culture is extremely supportive. We run a non-traditional set of hours. We have students that start from 8 to 3. They're mostly young and far. We have students who come to school from 4 to 8:30. They're mostly older and closer. So we have flexibility with the use of time. And then there's overlap. So day students stay into the night students come early, and they share courses, and it creates a really rich space. We also use technology as a tool, not as the basis of instruction, but our teachers use technology to differentiate in the classroom. So we use things like instructional playlists that are built using Google Classroom and Cortex, learning from Brooklyn Lab on that one, to how to create short mini lessons that students use to build upon their skill that's aligned to what teachers do. We use projects that are focused on the real world in the classroom to help apply the content. And we have advanced placement courses, dual enrollment courses, all of these things and internships for students that allow them to kind of complete their holistic journey. So we believe that the key to helping young people be successful is again, warm support, and then also challenging academics that are using instructional techniques that connect to where students are and help them grow more quickly. And so what we're trying to do with this work is, one, show that young people of all kinds can be really successful if we do schooling differently, and two, help to share with our broader network in the state and across the community that these techniques can be used for success. And so what we found is, by doing that, we've had Democrats and Republicans we've had a real challenge with Democratic ideology in the state around not being for charters. But what we found is that when folks visit the school, they might hate charters. And what I say is fine, hate charters. I'm not getting into charter versus public, but don't hate Excel, right? Don't hate the work that we're doing and what young people are experiencing. And that kind of blending we found to be important to helping to bridge the aisle.
Well, it sounds like whether it's you're using innovative techniques or an innovative program structure, it is opening doors to having different kinds of conversations with different people in your communities. I'd like to turn to the audience for a moment and actually ask you, in terms of this idea of leveraging innovation to invite different stakeholders to your table, whatever that table is, how many of you are using innovation at this time? Is this a new idea, or is this something that's a core and critical part of your work? And so if you turn to Slido, there is a quick opportunity to respond. And I can say, when I started speaking with Mark and Jeremiah, we often talk about strategic partnerships, and we often talk about leadership and capacity. But this idea of leveraging innovation to sort of disrupt and break open the types of conversations that people have had over and over that tend to get contentious, because it's the same issues played over and over. It's the same sort of language, the same sort of programs. And so by stepping out of what's expected with new ideas and new ways of doing things to solve the challenges or to address the challenges in your community, that's something that really stood out to me in terms of thinking a little bit differently about ways to cross the aisle.
I think innovation also just lightens the personal effect that we take. When somebody comes in with a school model that in theory is structured just like every other school in this district, but basically says, we're going to do it, but just do it much better than you, that's a little offensive. And they may be able to, and that may be what that community needs, but it's also a much tougher pill to swallow.
We also get trapped in the fix-it, where it's like coming into particularly communities that experience a lot of challenges with this, we're going to fix it, versus create and build. And that's what really stands out about some of the work that you're doing. It's not about going back and, tinkering with the system. It's about really creating new ways of doing things. All right, thank you for your response. It looks like, and this is South by Southwest, but a lot of you are actually looking towards innovations and new ways of doing things and leveraging these to bring new people, new ideas and new voices to the table.
And one thing I think is interesting that we've learned on this work is when you're structuring the innovation, creating intentionally diverse groups of people who think differently from different backgrounds creates a better innovative result. So rather than kind of going to the people you are most comfortable with to do the innovation, also create and add people on the team early who are going to think the opposite of your work. And what it did for us is we at least found out who the blockers were going to be before we got the charter approved, which was helpful. But then it also pushed our thinking about what things were we taking for granted because we were in this kind of echo chamber about our model that was going to show up later on when kids and families truly became a part of the environment.
So starting to walk through it with the lens of somebody across the aisle from yourself. Yeah. And how does your vision sound? How does your program look from their perspective and what they're grounded in and rooted in their daily work? In addition to looking at innovation, we're going to now look at capacity and leadership. In California, JFF is doing a lot of work around building capacity of what we call network leaders, and bringing people together to address these larger issues, whether it's post-secondary and workforce, business, CBOs, and community leaders. And one thing we've learned is that capacity counts, but the way that leaders lead is what transforms. And so I'd like for you to share a little bit about how you used mission to lead across the aisle. So not leading with your organization, because again, throughout this conversation, I've just heard you talk about the broader vision. And so how do you leverage that?
Well, the charter work in Mobile that has launched sits as underneath an organization that I mentioned earlier called the Mobile Area Education Foundation, which was founded almost 27 years ago as a place in the community where all kinds of people came to say enough is enough, and let's then get smarter about how we improve the quality of education. And so the organization exists because of that mission. But the organization can improve education without collaboration. This organization is nothing if we aren't working with other schools and working with businesses. I mean, we don't control schools. That's not what we do. So we have to leverage ourselves. And
that seems obvious, that we lead with the mission. But then how often when we're actually in meetings do we see people's organizations and institutional territories get in the way of serving that greater vision? And how do we start to shift that where all of these different organizations working in the space are committed to that mission?
Yeah, I mean, it may seem a little pie in the sky, but I think there's a couple of things that are really important to acknowledge. First, in a community, if you look, this is very local, and I think this is the important nuance because I think the national platform and the local platform are slightly different here. In the local context, resources and opportunities are scarce, and we can actually get further. We can get more dollars and get more done if we are connecting our work to a central mission versus saying that our organization is first on here. We're responsible for all of these things and then blocking out others. Because the other part that is true is this mission work is too big for one organization. No, even school districts that have thousands of employees can't deliver as a sector in this work alone. It's too much. So we have to acknowledge, I think, that and come to and have conversations around how we share. So, for example, we in our Mobile, what we've done well is go after external funding collaboratively and come up with funding plans that describe who is doing what in the share of the mission. So blueprinting, shared design, shared development, using design thinking together in partnership to come to, these are things that we've found to be helpful tools to allow us to come to consensus around mission, not organization.
So you're truly responding as a coalition to, but not necessarily chasing initiatives and funding that are connected to those.
Yeah, we found doing that works horribly.
And yet we see it so often where people come together when it's time to write the grant.
Right.
Mark, we know that part of leadership is building trust. And so, especially when you're working with divergent stakeholders, people who disagree, people who don't want to sit down together, people who think that the gap or the aisle may be even greater than it is, how do you build that trust, especially with today's divisive environment, language, and climate?
Yeah, we'll talk about this some more with strategic partnerships as well, but I want to even step back and say, all that said, we are certainly spreading the work out and getting everyone at the table, but there still has to be someone there. We call them intermediaries, backbones, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. Somebody has to own the work. Now, they spread that ownership out, they delegate, but it has to be organized, and it has to be on the shoulders of somebody or some group that is going to sleep at night thinking about the next day and who's going to move this work forward, because we all have many, many hats. Every teacher in the room knows that, but every organization has multiple functions that they serve in a community. So there still needs to be this guiding piece, but again, it doesn't have to be a controlling piece. And I think that's the key here, is it's about organizing the work and then delegating it out to partners. And that helps build the trust, because the moment that the backbone becomes the organization leading and pointing fingers, that's when the trust gets broken down. And if we're not thinking of it, if the mission's in the center, that makes it a lot easier. But if an organization is in the center, which is how a lot of kind of collective works have happened, it tends to create some animosity in the group.
And also, you mentioned accountability or getting work done, and so that's something that tends to build trust, doing that work.
Yes, absolutely. But I think the accountability has to be from the entire group, because again, you can't just have one holder of the accountability, because then all of a sudden they're the ones with either the carrot or the stick, and that's not a position you want any of the organizations being in this work.
So it's guiding.
Absolutely.
When you're doing all of this work, Jeremiah, with coalitions and with bringing people together, do you experience a tension between this idea of sharing credit and also at the same time having your organization and having your brand? How do you address that tension?
Yeah, I think it's actually one of the hardest things that a group or person trying to work across the aisles who's boundary spanning does effectively. It's balancing humility with brand. Because let's be real, brand brings dollars.
And everybody needs those.
People who do brand work really well get funded really well. But it also puts a target on your back if you're trying to do boundary spanning work, because others, petty jealousy, threat, just begin to show up. And so how we think about it at the Education Foundation, and it has been to the detriment sometimes of funding, is that we are catalysts. And in chemical reactions, catalysts are always consumed. You don't see them on the back end. What you see is the positive reaction. And what we have to do is help our partners, but also our funders, understand specifically how to measure the catalyst result. So what's the thing that has happened as a result of the convening that we've done? What's the thing that's happened because we stepped out and did a charter? What's the thing that's happened because we've brought 1,500 business partners in collaboration with schools? These are specific ways that we work that enable collaboration. And so it is more work on the intermediary, but it also is the way to make things sustainable. We think about our work in three ways. We think our job is to create pressure when it's appropriate, to provide support in tangible, financial, and human capital ways, and to provide political cover. Because when our partners need to step out and do the work, the hard work, whether it's educators, business folks, elected officials, we have got to help folks not get their legs chopped off. Right? Because in very tense working across aisle situations, let's be honest, folks want to cut each other apart in a political way. So we try to use political cover in the sense, not in the sense of necessarily like big campaigns, but little p politics. By engaging with stakeholders at the grassroots level, then suddenly the polity is fighting against what might be what the political hawks want to see happen. And that is an important strategy in the political spectrum.
And you have to move beyond the brand.
That's it.
To an idea of service. And I really liked the idea of the catalyst, because without that catalyst, you don't get the reaction. And so it is one way to help describe the importance of the catalyst in the broader work and those broader outcomes. So humility, not brand. Another idea that we use at JFF when we're working with networks of leaders is this idea of node, not hub, not that centerpiece. And Mark, you've already spoken to this quite a bit, but I'd love to circle back and have you talk a little more about how the coalition mindset provides traction for your work. This is new, moving your organization out of the center. So how does that actually serve you?
Yeah, I mean, it starts on paper literally when you have the mission at the center again, and not any one organization. So practically, it's changing the way we make organizational charts and diagram these things out. But in reality and in our mindsets, where the big shift has to come, is that instead of this backbone, again, owning it all, everybody is acting, all these organizations, again, with the mission at the center, everybody around it is acting in servitude towards this middle piece. The other good thing about this is that when it's not the hub, but instead of nodes, well, really there are no geographic bounds to a mission. And so for us, we want to be in every community that needs us across this country. And so as long as mission stays in the center, we could have Alabama here and lots of different nodes within each community there, and everybody operating towards, again, this same purpose and same goal. Two words really have defined the history of Birmingham, and I've heard this ever since getting on the ground, but I felt it as well, and it's being very divided, and that's being very territorial, especially when it comes to nonprofits. We talked about this with funding, but it's shifting mindsets, thinking of it not as a pie where we have to get our slice before the other person does, but really as a stream. And if we do this work collaboratively, if we do it well, and if we're linking together, then it's going to be a stream of funding that's going to start pouring in. But that starts by connecting folks even across the same town who are doing identical work. I can think of two specific nonprofits, both in fair, affordable home ownership, who have been doing it for 20 plus years, but had never really even met. But we want to be in both of those communities. We want to build up Inslee and build up Eastlake and wherever else in Birmingham, throughout the South and throughout the nation. And so for us, connecting to each of these communities and folks who are already on the ground doing that work is critical. But it's always, even to be able to connect, you have to first see that mission is at the heart of what you're talking about, not your organization, not any other single organization.
I mean, a theme that really is rising to the surface is, as we think about crossing aisles, it's shifting how we place ourselves, our egos, our organizations, and moving us from the center, whether that's being right, or whether that's doing the work, or whether that's getting the credit, and really creating a lot more space for others, other ideas, other organizations to enter into. So the leadership and the approach to leadership that you both are vocalizing is really different than what we see but it sounds like it is one of those core practices that is allowing you to do this work and to connect with different stakeholders and shareholders in your community. And so on the idea of partnership, which was another thing that in our conversations have surfaced as being really key. We know that a core component of building enduring partnerships is this idea of trust and engaging trust. And yet when we turn on the television, when we hear many people can't even have Thanksgiving dinner with their families anymore without it exploding. And so how can you enter today's culture and climate and lead with trust or activate trust when this is frayed?
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, that's the easy answer of it. But the other piece is that it takes time. And when you're in the day-to-day, whether you're running a classroom, a school, a nonprofit, a district, or any other number of organizations that are out there beyond our sector, you have to carve out time, and you have to say, I'm going to stop putting out fires and look ahead and kind of have that foresight to say, where do we want to be 20 years from now? And where you're going to land is that the only way to do it is together. And the only way to build that is through trust. Mm-hmm. So it's bringing people to the table early. It's coming up with that collective mission. And it's also identifying that mutual benefit. So what is it that you value as a private sector contracting firm? For a lot of the folks that we're teaming with, literally they're realizing that an old gray-haired white man's game, which has been construction for years and years and years, a lot of these boomers are retiring off. So they not only need youth, but they're realizing that they need an infusion of racial diversity, gender diversity, and so that's the value add that we have, because they're really doing a poor job, and they realize it, construction companies, of developing their own diverse young pipeline.
So you start changing the language you use.
Yeah.
And instead of you're talking about talent pipeline, return on investment, yes. And these are words that sometimes educators are uncomfortable with. You know, we educate the child, the whole child, and so when you start talking about talent pipeline, sometimes educators shy away from that because it feels like you're providing a cog for business and industry. But how? Well,
it goes both ways. So let's be clear. When we bring business partners into the classroom or into the schools, oftentimes we're throwing around terms like IEP and CCSO and you name it. We have our own jargon and our own terms that we throw out, and it just confuses everyone. So you first have to either put it in layman's terms, or you have to have a translator at the table. And I think that's one thing that our organization has been able to do, is translate between the private sector and the public sector, speak to what matters for you. And that's where, once that kind of that mutually beneficial piece is, and you can, this is the best part, you can act out of self-interest. We invite businesses to the table to say, this is going to help whatever bottom line you care about. We invite faith-based organizations saying, you can help change this community. The Bible speaks about poverty over 300 times. So that's an invitation to come in. And so it's whatever you care about, you can win at that by working together.
And at JFF, when we look nationally, what we find is that when you invite business and industry to the table as partners that are focused on their problems, then you have much more of a sustainable solution where they're putting skin in the game that endures and doesn't dry up the moment that things get hard, because this is about charity. Instead, it is about what's at the center of what they need, as well as what serves their community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think once they have that investment, then it's easy to start saying, okay, you're invested, you're engaged, you're not going anywhere, so here's what you can do towards this mission. And so that's the next piece, which is to ultimately these are kind of just the first steps. To build the trust, you then have to deliver, and that's every single organization around this mission, delivering on the pieces that they've said they're going to deliver, and doing it in a timely manner. Jeremiah brought up urgency earlier, but agreeing on these kind of deliverables, agreeing on these deadlines, and then the entire community of partners holding one another accountable for these results. One thing that we've done, and so you wouldn't say, let's all go alleviate poverty. So let's go do that right now, right? You have to start small. And one thing that we've done is kind of set up opportunities for our partnering organizations to get quick wins. So what's this one small low-hanging fruit piece that you can do to kind of get us going in that direction, right? So we have a brand new mayor in Birmingham. He's 36 years old. He's fairly new at this. And so for him, we picked out one building in one part of town, Inslee, Alabama. It was once 40,000 strong, black and white. Pretty much everybody was middle class, but this was when the working class was middle class. But as steel industry left, it left this community at about 4,500, mostly poor, mostly African-American folks. And so the mayor cares about Inslee, obviously, but how do you fix Inslee? And how do you first engage Inslee in that process? And so for us, it was identifying one building that the city currently controls, it's vacant, and within that building, by bringing partners to the table, we're going to put a low-income pediatric dentistry service, because that matters for kids staying in school. 2 is a minority business incubator, so we can start to give young people with ideas, or even older people with ideas in the community, an opportunity to plant those seeds and see how they grow and support them along the way. We're also going to give the city space to have a little public safety unit in there. And then Build Up is going to take up the largest footprint in this building, and we're going to be essentially doing school and teaching skills there. And then from that little hub there, we'll go out into the community and start rebuilding homes as well. But we look at this one 24,000 square foot building as a quick win for both the mayor to get what he needs out of it, but also for the other partners at the table.
And this is important, because one of the first things you said that you both are doing is tackling big problems. And those big problems are going to take years and generations. You've been at this since you've been 17. And so it's that combination of having the long view as well as understanding as a strategy the importance of quick wins. And we see this, and actually as we're working with our partners nationally, like having both the long-term plan, but also really understanding what are those short-term wins, not only from one perspective, but from the perspective of multiple partners.
And you know what's a tension oftentimes in this discussion is quick wins are in tension with scale. And most people think about this as like, you'll never get to scale if you do this. Well, here's a change that's helped me a little bit in this question, is we think about scale as in the health standpoint. So when you catch a contagion, it scales across the globe, right? We just experienced this with the flu. It wasn't because some government entity pushed out the flu, right? That's not how it got there.
We hope not.
Right, we don't think so. People caught it. They caught it, right? And so I think scale, when you think about it in terms of catching high quality ideas that then can be employed in multiple places and in multiple contexts, is going to be the way we get to real reform and improvement in our spaces. Not having an entity of government or something like that push these things out through institutional capacity. It's always going to get trumped. Trumped. Moving on. Share the credit. That's it.
Once we have these wins, then it becomes a lot easier to actually share the credit, and I think that's pretty key. The other piece that's not on here is celebrating those wins.
Yeah.
Our communities are so beat up, and they don't get to celebrate enough, and we don't celebrate together enough. And I think that's an opportunity, especially it's way easier to celebrate, like if you've ever been to Mardi Gras in New Orleans, where I was previously.
Or in Mobile.
The birthplace. It's one of the most diverse settings you'll ever find yourself in, and a lot of these aisles that we brought up from the very beginning are just nowhere to be found, right? Because people are ecstatic, and they're jubilant, and they're working hard, and celebrating together. And I think that's the important part about the wins and the sharing the credit.
So building those strategic partnerships, it's finding the wins and creating a virtuous cycle. We have so many vicious cycles, particularly in a lot of the communities that we work with and that you're working in. And so really finding those pieces that start you create win, and then you can create another win, and then you can find that next win. I'm interested from the audience, what are some strategies that you use in your work to build trust across divergent stakeholders? A lot of you have said you're doing some you're using innovation and bringing people to the table. So what are some of those strategies that you're using? And you can go to Slido, and there's yet another Slido question for you. And this one's a free response. And not a lot of strategies. Oh, there we go. Building cross-sector, cross-neighborhood partnerships and building, governing, and advising boards that are truly diverse. That's so important. So often you go to the meetings and you see either the faces that have always represented organizations and you're asking them to innovate. Or you see people who may not necessarily represent the voice of the community. Transparency. Radical transparency, it hurts. Collective impact, active listening to each project, creating open brainstorming meetings with all stakeholders. How often do people actually act as gatekeepers instead of door openers as we are trying to work across the aisle? Or they invite those people in whose ideas resonate with them rather than whose voices conflict with them. Showing up. I love that. The idea of the activist is the person who shows up. Looking for the win-win, and finding common ground to build trust before having the difficult conversations. That one's really important. We didn't get to the timing of like building slowly and then deepening the work. We have a few minutes, and we're going to take some open questions and open conversation. I do want to share a few resources. One of the nice things is that many people across the nation are doing innovative work. And at JFF, part of our role as a national intermediary is to collect these ideas and elevate evidence-based practices. So if we could go back to the slides. So whether you are K-12, coming from post-secondary, business or industry, we have resources that have been drawn nationally that you can be tapping into that are open source resources. We have our Students at the Center work, which is looking at student-centered practices and engaging research. And this is a hub where we're collecting practices from all across the nation to support student-centered learning. We have Possible Futures, which is really starting with middle school and looking at having resources for young people to build those skills for success. Sometimes we call them 21st century skills. If you're talking to business and industry, they call them employability skills. But these are concrete resources that will be available this summer that were built off an I3 grant. And then we have, for those people who are more at the intersection of learning and workforce, we have our Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning. And so this is, again, really bringing national resources. And so often, what we see is in communities, there are these bright points of light, but people are often starting from scratch. They may not know things exist down the street or know things that there are these national models or tools. So please, if you're doing any of this work, please feel free to visit, beg, borrow, and steal. But now let's actually open the floor to questions.
Tobie and I worked on a project at JFF together, Pathways to Prosperity. So let's hit this one because I think it's a pretty easy one. Where do career pathways fit? Have local businesses been receptive? Our thinking is that local businesses not only have to be receptive, they have to be driving a lot of this. The most successful models, and a lot of what we're doing at Build Up is based off the Swiss educational model, has the private sector defining desired outcomes, and then we backwards map. We're not starting with state high school standards. We're not starting with the ACT. We're not starting even with post-secondary outcomes. We're starting with what is a career-ready young person? What do they have academically? What knowledge? What skills? What soft skills, employability? All of those pieces, and that's where we go from. And so when you can have businesses, the private sector at that level engaged, it's not just Skyping in an engineer from a Chevron station up the road or whatever.
Or writing a check.
It's exactly, absolutely. I think along those lines, though, the danger here, and this is the next one down that Alex asked, is how do we balance learning for workforce and learning for learning's sake, preparing us for the future? Here's where we are, at least to Build Up. And I think first and foremost, we are clear with families that Build Up is not for everyone. My entire high school experience with athletics. Build Up doesn't have time for athletics. In this situation, though, obviously to be successful in this world, you need to know who William Shakespeare is, right? You need to know a lot about this world. That's just broad general knowledge that you need to know. That said, you don't have to read every sonnet or every poem. And so I think there is a balance to strike, but we put first things first, and what's actually going to allow our young people to pursue whatever desires they have for their future. And so we don't close any doors to anyone. I think that's the key piece, is we're not sending anyone down a set path, and that's some of the ways that we've had to adapt locally as opposed to the Swiss-German model.
It's also how we talk about college and careers and how we prepare young people to think about their future, and really starting to promote agency. So a young person's future isn't determined by where their last name is in the alphabet in terms of what career or what counselor they have in high school and the 1 or 2 times they get to see them, but they have some really deep exploration experiences to explore their vision of their future. And that's on one of our resources, we have Possible Futures, and that's really the core of that, is developing agency in young people and their framework for making those decisions. So it's not about something we do to them in terms of preparation, but it's about them understanding what their passions and their priorities are. And there's a great article in the Washington Post today that talks about that. And now it is the end of the session, but I want to make sure that everyone knows that we are here today, and catch us afterwards if you have additional questions. If you want to dig down into the weeds, please feel free to catch us either in this room or in the halls.
Thank you.
Thank you.